introductions. I just did mine, but I'll do one more time for everyone that's tuning in with us on live stream. I'm Gertie Harris, the founder of Fireside at 5. We've got a great panel today. We're going to be discussing virtual solutions to increase voter turnout. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to go through the agenda and just call you out by name. I'm going to ask you guys to tell us who you are, a little bit about what you do, and then what you'd like to get out of this chat. As I said, mine is to understand the ways that Fireside at 5 can use our platform to help increase voter turnout with the next 40 days ahead of us. And so I'm excited to hear from all of you. Let's start with Elizabeth Fernandez from Movement Voter Project.
Hi there. So I'm the communications director with Movement Voter Project. We are one of the largest grassroots funders in the country. So we are working with emerging and established grassroots organizing groups, especially in key battleground states, and we fundraise for them. That is basically what we do. And then we also work really closely to help develop coalitions and work in coalition to identify where needs are and resources are important to try to really build a movement led by the most impacted people in the most impacted communities to help not just on election day, but every single day before and after.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here today. We appreciate it. Let's go on to Leo Harris. Oh, wait, we can't hear you. Let's make sure your audio's connected.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go.
Hi, my name's Leo Harris. I'm a junior at American University. I used to be a former campaign staffer for Dan Baer's campaign in Colorado for Senate. I spent some time working at the DSCC, which is the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. I worked on the Hill last year during the COVID pandemic at the start and during the impeachment trial. And I currently work as a legal assistant at a law firm doing international law. And I'm really looking forward to hear everyone's ideas on how this year is going to be different for young voters, as well as how to keep up with a lot of the absentee ballots and how we're going to be able to really get through this election season, counting everyone's votes and making sure that there's not any disparages in any districts and across the country. So I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks, Leo. And also really looking forward to hearing your perspective as a student at American as well. I think that'll be really valuable to the discussion. Next, let's go over to Molly.
Hello, my name is Molly. My pronouns are she, her. I am with Swing Left, and specifically I manage our college network program at Swing Left. So as an organization, we're working on connecting folks across the country to opportunities where they can be the most impactful in winning key states and, you know, either flipping them or turning them blue. So our college program works with specifically groups of students on campuses and states across the country to help them contact voters in these key states through like voter contact methods like phone banking, relational organizing on digital platforms, letter writing with Vote Forward, that type of thing. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear from other folks about these topics and happy to share some knowledge on the youth organizing space this year. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, no, that was something I really wanted us to get into, especially is how we're going to engage the youth with 40 days to go. I think that's where a lot of our focus efforts need to be right now. So looking forward to hearing your perspectives on that. Let's move on to Katherine.
Hi, I'm Katherine Ranft with BallotReady. Thank you so much for having me. BallotReady is a nonpartisan civic tech company on a mission to ensure that every voter votes informed on every candidate all the way down ballot for every election. And so through BallotReady.org, we allow every voter the opportunity to research their ballot, find their polling place, and make a plan to vote, as well as requesting their ballot. And we also partner with really innovative organizations, like a couple that are on this call with us, that we are really that are doing very cool pioneering things. And I think my main goal for the call is just to talk about how the digital space has grown and changed, and where we think that some of these innovative things can head in the future.
Amazing. Likewise. And I think actually our next panelist, Victor, we'll probably be able to shed a lot of light on digital solutions. You work at ACRONYM as the creative director. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Gertie, and so nice to be with everybody today. So yeah, as Gertie mentioned, my name is Victor Nguyen-Long. I'm the creative director at ACRONYM. And ACRONYM has a lot of moving parts, as I think Katherine knows. But we, on one side of our work, we're a 501c4 nonprofit, and therefore our primary purpose work is actually around voter registration and mobilization through several programs, of which Katherine and BallotReady are partners with as well. And then we have an affiliated super PAC that gets to be as partisan as we want with it as well. And that's where we've been running digital ad campaigns for the past year to build narratives and reinforce key messages to persuadable voters to soften the ground effectively for the Democratic candidate, which now we know is Joe Biden. And you know, my background is having come from the brand marketing world, working at Red Bull and Nike for a long time, was just trying to figure out how do we take what we know how to, in terms of getting people to buy energy drinks and cars and sneakers and all that stuff, and bring it to the political space, because I deeply believe that creative and culture can be the force multiplier that makes all of our efforts even more effective. And my goal here is one, to shed light on kind of the things that have been happening behind the scenes, hopefully to give lots of people hope in the last 40 days. It's just so impressive what I think groups and individuals have been doing, and lots of ways that you can still plug in this final stretch to take it to the finish line.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. That was a great round of intros. I'm excited to dive into questions. We kind of already went over the first one. The goal of this panel was to pull a diverse group of industry leaders that, came from a variety of backgrounds with different political experience. So we've already kind of we've talked a little bit about what each of you guys do and how you're involved with this upcoming election. I think I want to move into the second question on the agenda, which is specifically asking how you've seen virtual solutions and digital engagement tactics used differently this year versus previous elections. Obviously, this one's the most important in our lifetime. And it's unfortunate that it had to come right during the pandemic, because that obviously created a big shift in the ways that campaigns are able to kind of engage and actualize their voters. So I kind of want to, just leave this up for discussion and throw it out to the group. If anyone wants to sort of take a stab at it first, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I can call on somebody.
Well, I'll start. I think Victor hit the nail on the head there with using tactics that we know work in other industries and bringing them into voting. Things like making sure our technology is mobile first and applying calls to action that are clickable in every ad or post that you present. Asking those asks are great tactics that we know work in other industries that we're now seeing are already working in voting. Just to start us off.
I love it. I know one of the things for us that really had to shift is so for us, we also work really closely, sister organizations with the Student Power Networks, kind of in key battleground states, specifically in college campuses. But then also, we are not a funder that has an endowment. We actually fundraise. We just beat our $75 million goal and are on our way to $100 million that we're going to be moving to grassroots organizing groups everywhere. Emerging groups, like big stakeholder groups. We just launched the Kenosha Fund for groups that don't even exist yet, because there wasn't a lot of organizing happening in Kenosha. And now there is, and people are quitting their jobs to start their own organizations. But we had to transform everything and every way that we reach out to people. And for us, a lot of it has been switching completely to virtual parties, like virtual Zoom parties, virtual Zoom fundraisers. We started a series of alumni parties. So, we've done U of M and Vassar and Harvard, and, raising literally $100,000 on a call. And that's just money that goes straight to the people who are doing voter registration and voter turnout and GOTV. And one of the most amazing things for me is how student organizing has completely transformed. So the student power networks, actually, they have completely reshifted their entire model, where they're actually doing little half-hour Zoom parties that are just relational organizing. So getting people to commit, I'm going to launch, I'm going to just have, like a cocktail hour with 10 friends, and getting one of them. And it grows so organically and so fast. And it's just that one personal conversation that really gets the information out there. And misinformation is one of the biggest barriers right now that we're seeing. One of the things that really happened in Wisconsin, if you recall, when they were having the primary election, it was a total disaster, and yet there were huge progressive wins up and down the ballot, every single way, from statewide, actually winning a state Supreme Court victory that is going to be just game changing, and all the way down to like local ballot initiatives to fund schools and stuff. And that happened in the middle of the rules literally shifting multiple times a day because of court cases. But the grassroots organizing was just so powerful that they were able to get the information out there to people right away. And they had spent years becoming trusted messengers. So they know they're going to believe the person who is out there raising mutual aid funding and sharing it with folks in the middle of this pandemic disaster. When they tell you this is actually what's happening, that's who they believe. And building those trusted messengers virtually, even if it may be people who don't normally have a big social media presence, those one-on-one conversations, that relational organizing, that's been so game changing. And we've really had to shift as a movement how we do it.
Elizabeth, you got me so fired up.
I'm good at that. That's one of my superpowers.
Yeah, if I may, I was just going to say, so ACRONYM, along with Higher Ground Labs and Arena, actually did a documentary called Dress Rehearsal about the win in Wisconsin, and directly related to digital organizing and how relational organizing. If there's anybody that's watching this that doesn't understand that sort of jargon, it's really just about peer-to-peer conversations, right? It's like literally talking to your neighbors, which we used to do by knocking doors, but now it's a matter of Zoom calls and text banking and literally just having conversations. And a large part of that, a large part of the success that we saw in Wisconsin was people realizing the power that they wield with this thing. Sorry, you can't see it, but it's a phone. It's a phone. And in the pre-COVID days, you would be knocking doors, canvassing and whatnot. And now we realize that we have these networks, whether they're 10-person social networks or 5,000-person social networks. Every little bit counts, especially as somebody that's come from outside the political world and talked to people that are Victor, like they're asking me like, Victor, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I literally tell people it's like every little bit counts. We are playing a game of inches. And it just takes everybody's effort, whether that's a $1 donation or $100 donation, whether that's one tweet or one Facebook post or one Instagram post or a TikTok dance, right? All of those things count, and we are all literal content creators. And so in the absence of being able to go knock on somebody's doors and having those in-person conversations, we still wield a lot of power. And for 40 days, if you posted one positive thing about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, or just about the movement, or correcting misinformation, which I wholeheartedly agree with you, Elizabeth, is one of our biggest challenges. If we're able to do that, and you did one of those things a day, like it would be monumental. And so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I want to continue on that point you made about how it is a game of inches. Elections are very much a game of inches. So in 2016, 80,000 votes spanned across Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin is what changed the election. 80,000 votes. So we go back to your comment about these small groups and how I've done door-to-door canvassing a few times for a few different candidates, and it's an extremely exhausting and laborious process. And you never feel like you're really that welcomed when you're on someone's doorstep. And these Zoom meetings and this ability to correct people and doing these kind of like smaller things on social media and using our phone is so much more productive, and our ability to reach more people is such a tool, especially when you consider that 80,000 votes is what changed 2016. I mean, you think about how many retweets a given tweet will get, it's in the millions. And so it's so interesting thinking about how elections are, these very small shifts is what can make this massive difference. And so I think focusing and learning from 2016 and pushing into 2020, all of the early polling data that's come out has been very optimistic for the Democratic Party, which is nice. And it was in similar shape for Hillary at this time. And so I think a big thing for the Democratic Party is understanding, how do we learn from what happened in 2016 and making sure that those 80,000 voters do come out? What do we have to do to ensure that we're registering people? And a big conversation, big talking point we're probably going to get to is the young voters. How do you get young people who are always the most vocal on social media and other platforms to actually come out and show up? And how is it easier in COVID, and how is it harder in how we count votes and the repercussions that come with mail-in voting? So I think it's a very interesting place that we are in 2020, and how we react will definitely set the precedent for years to come, and in 2024 and so forth. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And actually, it's a nice segue over to Molly. I wanted to ask you, since you are working specifically in trying to galvanize the youth vote, especially on like college campuses, can you talk about some of the solutions that you have found to be most successful with young voters? Obviously, as we've heard from other panelists in this conversation, this kind of intimate chat-like format can be really helpful. And we found a ton of success doing these fireside chats because you've got an hour of highly engaged time with 6 to 8 participants, and everyone's involved in the conversation, which kind of creates this natural buy-in, right? And so then you're committed to what you're talking about, and then all of a sudden you leave feeling a little bit more inspired to make a difference. So I'm in complete agreement with you guys. I feel like this platform has actually really lent us a lot of opportunities to engage at a more intimate level with people. But Molly, I'd be curious to hear from you, and Leo, feel free to chime in as well from what you've seen on American's campus.
Yeah, so thanks. Definitely agree with everyone. Zoom is like my whole life in a way I could never have imagined, and students are using it as their venue for all of their events. That was just not the case before. I think something that I think about constantly is our key campus organizing strategy pre-pandemic was get in people's faces as much as possible on campus. Like, you might have to ask someone to register to vote 10 times before they say yes to you. And like, then you can be right there with them, making sure they fill out the form correctly and helping them out. Same with, filling out pledge to vote cards and committing to volunteer. That all happened on tables in a quad with like free donuts and coffee as you walk to class. And you would really like get to know your campus organizer because you saw them on your like way to class every day, or you knew your college Dems group or whatever that was. And so I think the biggest challenge for campus organizing specifically is that you don't get that interaction anymore, or that guaranteed face time, and you have to create it in other ways. And that means you have to make virtual events exciting enough for people to not just sign up for them, but actually end up attending. And so, yeah, we've seen students getting really creative with how they can incorporate voter contact into an event that also has some sort of pizzazz that is exciting and get folks to really engage, right? I'm really excited that relational organizing has been brought up already, because I think it's like the key this year, especially because we're leaning so heavily on digital and virtual interactions. Being able to sit down for an hour with other young people on a Zoom call and have like a text bank where you reach out to not necessarily strangers, but people you've interacted with in some point in the past, that those people you're texting about their voter registration status or their plan for volunteering in the next few weeks, they're much more likely to say yes to you or interact with you about getting registered to vote if they know you already and they already had your phone number and you're reaching out in that way. So yeah, we're leaning really heavily into that. And I think it's been the biggest change in the space is thinking about like, okay, students are likely on Zoom for several hours a day already if their campuses have shifted to virtual learning. And then we're asking them to get on Zoom again, like in the middle of the day or after class to volunteer. And like, that's a lot. I think Zoom fatigue is super real these days, but we also have like such a committed youth population that is incredibly excited about this election and knows how important not just voting is, but also volunteering and turning their friends and peers out to volunteer. So yeah, I think strategies related to that are like always on our mind, and it's really exciting to hear from folks about it.
I know at American, on the campus at least, we used to have the same thing with tables set up on the quad, people registering, others to vote. And even at American, which is a very politically active campus, you had students who are not registered to vote. And the process to do so is not as intuitive as one, may think. And so having someone there to walk them through it is so helpful. But I do think that the point about students wanting to hop on a Zoom call after doing all of their classes on Zoom is very true. They're tired. They don't really want to interact again with people over Zoom. So I think there's that aspect. The other part of it is there's a lot of excitement about this election. And as you alluded to, people are volunteering much more than they have before. And I think the marches and the protests have really gotten people interested in volunteering and being part of it. And so I think that's something that's really optimistic. And even in the coming years following 2020, if you can kind of continue this trend of making voting not necessarily sexy, but making voting something that is interesting, making it a part of your civic duty again, and getting people really excited for election years, not only presidential elections, but also midterm elections, and understanding that their voice does matter and your vote does matter, especially in the local elections with officials in that regard. And so I think it's how do you continue the excitement, not only in 2020, but the years to follow, and how do you do that in a virtual world, I think is a question we're going to be faced.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you on that. I have a question, and this is sort of along the lines of, we've talked about what some of the most successful solutions have been, but on the flip side, there are a lot of issues that come up when it comes to digital. And I have a question specifically for Victor on this one, because you guys do digital advertising specifically. Can you talk to us a little bit about how, with all of these Facebook privacy laws coming up and the complete lack of information that's being spread, what are some of the things that you're doing? And obviously, there are downsides to virtual engagement as well. So can you shed a little light on how you're combating some of those issues?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the, as Elizabeth had pointed out, it's like misinformation, disinformation is a massive problem, right? And, as an organization, we feel strongly that like the social media platforms, when they limit advertising, like as Facebook has announced in the upcoming, in the week leading up to the election, it actually favors, it benefits sort of incumbents, right? In the fact that, for instance, Donald Trump, for example, has tens of millions of followers on Facebook, and therefore has a naturally an organic reach that he doesn't have to put a single dollar behind, right? Same thing with any right-wing media outlet, right? Whether they're regardless of where they are on the spectrum, they have these massive organic followings, and so they don't have to spend a dollar to spread their misinformation or whatever their message is. And so therefore, when you're in a sort of underdog position, like it really requires people to be able to use paid advertising to be able to put it in front of people that need to see it the most. And so that's like, to be frank, like one of the more discouraging things. But this is where digital advertising comes into play. So, a lot of folks come to me and be like, hey, Victor, like, have you seen the Lincoln Project stuff? Have you seen the Midas Touch stuff? They have like 2 million views, 3 million views. And frankly, as a creative soul, like all those videos and content that they put out are all my hopes, political creative hopes and dreams come to life in many ways, right? But they're only preaching in the choir. Now there's an argument to be said about like how big is the choir, right? The Midas Touch brothers actually said that in an interview recently, and it made a lot of sense, right? There's a very important role to be played when it's talking about like firing up the base, right? People that already think like you, people that already follow your social media handles and getting them excited about it. But oftentimes the people those 80,000 people that sort of cost the election in 2016, those are oftentimes people that that have turned off politics altogether. They don't follow the New York Times. They don't follow Breitbart. They don't follow politics in general. And therefore we have to put pieces of content in front of them with paid advertising. And we can't put a minute-long spot or a 2-minute-long spot like as much as I would like to, right? Because they just don't have the interest in it. And so the sweet spot from a digital advertising standpoint is often a 15-second video, right? And so we have to take that and we have to kind of feed people their vegetables, so to speak, because they've decided that they don't want to engage in politics, either because they're not interested or because they've had too much of it and they just can't handle it. And so, you know, with digital advertising, we're able to get these messages, and the approach that we've taken at ACRONYM is really to speak to these audiences over a long period of time, which is very intuitive and normal for corporate marketing and brand marketing. But we're like, hey, we're not going to try to cram everything in the kitchen sink into each individual ad, right? We're actually going to talk about, you know, tax cuts for the richer, for example, or, you know, Trump's failed response to the COVID pandemic. We're actually going to talk about it in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes it's going to be news clips. Sometimes it's going to be a testimonial. Sometimes it's going to be something animated. Sometimes it's going to be something humorous. Something is going to be a little bit more emotional. And we're going to pepper that in to people's feeds over the course of a year in hopes that come November 3rd or in the days leading up to November 3rd, you've been left with an impression that, hey, you know what? They may not be able to recite policy points, right? But they're at the very least have the feeling that, you know what, this Trump guy is just not going to do it for me. Like, and Biden's going to be the one to be able to do it. And so and then what we also found out that was highly effective is like when we target people that we call low information voters specifically, and we determine that through a number of different ways. But one of the ways is through surveying. We find out that we ask them which party controls the House of Representatives. And despite being a 50-50 guess, right, like 20-ish% of people get it incorrect. And then when we've identified those people, now what we found out is like one of the most effective techniques that we had was like literally putting a news article into their feed. Because again, they're not seeking it out like we do on a daily basis. And that in and of itself moves the needle quite effectively in terms of pushing away support for Trump.
That was incredible. As somebody with a little bit of a digital marketing background, I love everything about that. And I would love to hear as well from Katherine and Elizabeth, you guys work really hard at educating voters and amplifying up communities that might not have access to the same resources. Can you talk a little bit about the ways that you're making sure that all of this information is spread to the communities that are probably not getting the most fed their way? And, you know, as Victor mentions, these are people that are really influential. They're the undecided voters. I had a statistic in here in our agenda. It's about 1 in 5 Gen Z voters are Hispanic. That's a huge, huge percentage of the population that we need on our side to win this year. So I'd love to hear about how you guys are specifically reaching those markets.
Well, I know for us, a lot of the grassroots groups that we partner with are actually targeting folks that may not have a big online presence and who won't. I mean, they just will not. So, but these are people these are especially low propensity voters in communities of color who are really, really incredibly impacted. And it can be things like in North Carolina, for example, which was the first state to start vote by mail. They were sending out like little loteria cards, and that's like it's like a Mexican sort of game. It's really fun if you haven't played it. But they're sending those cards out by mail with voter information on the back to have it be something that people want to keep, something that's funny and charming and feels like they're talking directly to them. And that can even be things, for example, in a lot of states that to actually do vote by mail, you need to print out and fill out a form. And in a lot of communities, access to a printer is actually not there, especially, you know, maybe people who used to print stuff out at the office and the office isn't there anymore, used to go to libraries and a lot of libraries closed. So literally sending out vote by mail forms, just sending them out into communities where they know that they might not have access to a printer, and just being able to kind of close the technology gap, which is so real in a lot of communities that actually have low propensity voters who really need to turn out in this election. And a lot of that grassroots organizing, I'm going to say, was not happening anywhere near as much in this level in 2016. And that was one of the really big issues and real tragedies. And you know, honestly, like in a lot of ways of the Democratic Party, is that they were really focusing only on turning out the people who vote the most. And that's not going to be enough to win. Like, that's not going to get us to 50% plus one. We actually need the people who, you know, maybe haven't voted since 2008. And these are people, for example, who in a lot of states, they're conducting massive voter purges. And I can talk, working in Florida, I was with Florida Immigrant Coalition during the 2018 election, which was actually a contested election. So I know what it's like to organize in the middle of a contested election, and it's brutal. It is horrifying. But you know, we would get just like a week before the voter registration deadline, we actually got intel that hundreds of thousands of people had actually been taken off the voter rolls. And we had to go and literally text bank all of these people. And we did virtual ads, we did everything, but we actually, because we had their voter files, we had their information through the van, and we were able to actually send out hundreds of thousands of text messages, letting people know you may have been removed from the voter rolls and you don't even know it. You think you're gonna be able to go in and vote because you voted in the last election. They've removed you as a voter suppression tactic. And that is one of the places where information, and not just information on a broad scale, information on a really hyper local, hyper individualized scale is so important. As for things, you get into things like ballot chasing. So ballot chasing is where, you know, we actually have really sophisticated data techniques that a lot of the grassroots groups have access to. So with Movement Voter Project, we have a big capacity building program where we give groups who would never have been able to afford it access to these amazing high-tech tools, and even things, for example, if we've got a few small groups, you know, we will help them hire like a data manager who's going to work with all of them, you know, to work in all these different sort of communities. We've got folks, you know, in Navajo Nation who are working in indigenous communities who, you know, may not even have access to running water, but still need to vote. And so a lot of that actually means going back to real old school, like who do we know that's going to do a literature drop? Who do we know that's going to mail stuff out? And who do we know that's going to let people know via text message, hey, your ballot hasn't been turned in and hasn't been accepted yet? Because many times those people have actually sent their ballots, and they will get, and this happened a lot actually in 2018 in Florida, people would get letters saying their ballot was rejected, and literally the day after the election, if they sent in vote by mail. So we've got sophisticated data techniques where we can actually track and let people know so that they can start investigating it ahead of time.
So it's all proactive instead of reactive, which
absolutely. It has to be proactive. We have to use as sophisticated data technology as we can have access to really find out who is actually being voter suppressed without realizing it, because that is super real.
Do you have kind of any statistics that you could share with us of some of the areas you've seen the most voter suppression show up in? Or I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah. Well, I know at 32 different states since the loss of there's a Supreme Court ruling that really kicked out a really powerful voting rights law, and 32 states have actually implemented really severe voter suppression tactics. And some of these are, especially states in the South, some of these are really critical battleground states. If you think about the fact that 32 states have passed laws to try to suppress the vote, those numbers are tremendous. And that includes Florida, which Florida and Pennsylvania might be the two biggest tipping point states in the entire election.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I want to pass it over to Katherine. I'd love to hear a little bit about BallotReady's strategy. How are you guys targeting some of these swing states that are really important to get to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the tactics, I think Elizabeth did a fantastic job and touched on a lot of the things that I was going to mention as well. But just to kind of reiterate a few things she said and expand on those as well, I think making sure that tools are available in the language of the people that you're meeting is exponentially important, and specifically mailing, specifically mailing voters their applications in the language with instructions that they understand. And I know we've spent a lot of time talking about these swing voters, but there's also a huge swath of the electorate that needs to get out to vote in the first place. And as we're seeing the trends in, talking about the social media ads where people aren't online, it's coming more and more that more of these populations are cutting the cord and might not have a home phone line and might not have cable or access to these TV networks where traditional advertising and traditional outreach won't work. So being creative, loved hearing about the registration form that was sent, like being creative in how we're reaching people through all swaths, but using tactics that good organizers have been using for years and just turning those digital. So a lot of things that, a piece that I like to say often is that, a lot of the great tools like a pledge to vote, you reward a great organizer by having them do the data entry to clock all those pledges, where now that pledge to vote can be automated online to save that staff time and allow you to reach more people. So just thinking creatively within these spaces that everyone has so eloquently already mentioned, and expanding on those with making sure languages are available and we're reaching people where they are, which is on this black thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that's a really good point as well. As we move closer with 40 days left, I do want to ask you guys kind of what is your ramp up strategy? What are each of you guys trying to do with, a month and a bit to go leading up to the election?
So for us, there are two big things that we are really focusing on, and that is closing gaps in states. So we have a whole dashboard where literally we know exactly how much left it would take to close the gap in a certain state, so that grassroots organizations on the ground, big and small, are able to implement their moonshots, their dream programs, the things that they really wish they could have done if they'd only had budget. Here's the budget, now make that happen. And that includes things that are just being launched. For example, Pennsylvania, they have a golden window that they've never had before. Actually, starting, I believe, this weekend, they are going to have 3 entire weeks where you can early vote and register to vote in the same day. They've never had this before. And so we're trying to work, for example, with the groups in Pennsylvania to have giant celebrations, spread the word right now. They're having a real issue with vote by mail ballots actually being rejected because of the naked ballot problem. They've instituted a law. They need to actually put the ballots inside this special envelope before they mail them away. And if you don't, then that's it. Your vote isn't counted. So we're trying to really nip that in the bud, get people to early vote. We've got this amazing, powerful window to get people out there. So we're trying to do moonshot programs like that everywhere. And the other big thing that we are fundraising for is we have a PAC, Movement Voter PAC, and we're trying to raise money for our Defend the Election Fund, which is so, so important. In a close or contested election, we are going to be really heavily, as a country, we're going to be really heavily leaning on our local groups, because so many of these decisions are going to be made on a local level, on a county level. County commissioners are the ones who may decide if a bag of ballots get counted or not. They're the ones who are going to decide on voting irregularities. So we need really, really local groups to be able to ramp up post-election and to keep or expand staff, because a lot of times, if anybody's done election work, a lot of times their contract ends like a week after the election. We need to make sure that they're able to maintain staff levels, have legal battles. A lot of what happened in Wisconsin happened because some of our local partners on the ground in Wisconsin sued the state, and that actually helped change the rules. So we are going to be really, really trying to fundraise for our Defend the Election Fund. We know election night is not going to be the end of this election, and we need to be ready for this.
You bring up a really interesting point about how election night is not going to be the end of this. And so I guess, that kind of goes into another question. And I asked the group as well, how are the strategies going to continue, a week or 2 weeks after? Are we going to need to keep pushing those same messages? Victor, Molly, I'd love to hear from either of you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of combine my answers to these past two questions. I think like in terms of what Swing Left is doing, and specifically on college campuses, but also generally with our organization, just exporting all of this volunteer capacity that we've been building up for more than a year to campaigns, and communicating with these campaigns about where they need capacity, what would be helpful, like what dialer can we send a huge volunteer team who's trained and ready to go, and like how can we make that recurring, and how can like let us help you contact voters where you need it the most. So I think that's the first thing. More specifically about campuses, I mean, voting as a student has always been really complicated, and so just making sure that our folks who are on campuses or virtually are getting information out to their peers about what makes the most sense this year, especially with the pandemic, campuses are closing. It just like couldn't be more confusing. And I think like making sure that we're sending folks to organizations that are here and otherwise who can give them that information and also answer questions as needed is going to be a huge focus. And I mean, I think like the social media, meeting folks where they're at, we want like these micro influencers, people on TikTok who are frankly making like the funniest, most clever, smart content about voting. Like just keep doing what you're doing and making sure that we're promoting that, and like asking students to be those influencers, because it doesn't need to be someone with 1 million followers. It can be someone who's like making this content for their friends who share it with other people. And I mean, that's who I'm paying attention to, is folks who like I already followed and who are talking about information that I might need. So yeah, just letting the young people who are doing this really cool work do it as well as they can.
And to add to that, I think, just thinking about like meeting people where they're at, especially if we're talking about young people, it's just like what's been really encouraging that I've been seeing this cycle is really relinquishing the messaging and giving it to the creators and influencers to do with it what they will, right? So I think if you talk to anybody that manages surrogates, right, and for people outside the political world, that means influencers and spokespeople. And so oftentimes like campaigns are afraid to have celebrities or spokespeople say the wrong thing. But at the end of the day, what we've seen now, and even Biden's campaign has really embraced creators and allowed people to communicate to their communities the way that they know how to communicate best. And oftentimes when I think about like, I use YouTube as an example all the time, right? You take a look at the top 10 YouTube creators, especially that are popular amongst younger people, and I watch the content constantly. None of it speaks to me, right? As a 41-year-old person, like none of it speaks to me, even though this is my job to understand this. I don't get it. But whenever I see something that I don't understand, it's probably a good indication that that's where I need to be, right? And it's trusting people with competence. Like, and I will say, it's like if you want to appeal to young people, you have to have young people at the table, right? And not just in the room, but at the table, right? And we've seen it happen. I just spoke to somebody that a 20-year-old person that helped basically start the Yang Gang, right? Parker, who's an American university student, I think 20 years old, and is now a fellow on the Biden campaign because he was just he's an editor. He was cutting these rapid response videos by himself. They were getting thousands of retweets. And then the Biden campaign, smartly so, took him on board and now made him a fellow. And the video that's been more engagement than any other video that the campaign has put out, more than any tweet that Trump has put out, is the video of Trump saying like, hey, if I lose to Joe Biden, you'll never hear from me again, right? And at the end, it just says, I'm Joe Biden and I approve this message. Parker cut that and put it out. And there you go, right? Again, not instinctively what a political strategist or political consultant would ever tell you to do. In fact, it's actually kind of dangerous, right? But the fact that they gave the keys to the young person, right, the results speak for themselves, right? Biden's campaign also commandeered and asked politely to take over. I think it was Biden for America, if I'm not mistaken, as an Instagram handle that was started by a 15-year-old student. That was just a fan account. The same student started Pete for America, which the Pete campaign took over as the official campaign account on Instagram. Similarly, the Biden campaign reached out to the same person and started the Vote Joe campaign, which is now dedicated to memes and organic content that's shareable, because we know that that's what people want. We have the army. We just have to arm them with the right stuff. And official campaign content doesn't necessarily fit what people want to share on their social channels. And one of the things that, in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the BLM protests, we started seeing a lot of what was being referred to as like PowerPoint activism, and basically slideshows of like, here are the 10 things you need to know about racial justice in America. Here are the 5 things that you need to know about Black Lives Matter, right? And they're just slideshows that people were just posting constantly during the protests. And similarly, Molly's said it, it's like people are just seeking out information. It is complicated by design. And when 2/3 of Americans can't correctly name the 3 branches of government, we know that there's a deficit in civics education. And I use the story a lot, is that one of the top questions that the voter protection hotline receives every year is, what do I wear to go vote? Because they think it's a formal process. And so you have to really put yourself in the shoes of those voters, which are unfortunately the majority, right? As a 41-year-old person, the first time I ever voted in a midterm or a non-presidential election was 39 in 2018. And now I'm speaking as somebody that speaks and works in politics. So never take it for granted that people know. And so like, to whatever extent that people can demystify voting, right, I think is a huge benefit to everybody, whether that's through slideshow, whether that's through a TikTok meme. We've seen so many people on TikTok demystify financing a house and buying a car and all these other things. There's no reason why people can't help demystify the process of voting, which unfortunately is more complicated than it ought to be.
I 100% agree with that. That's something that I noticed when I was really, through all the internships I've held, it's something I've noticed is how overly complex really anything associated with the government is. And it's not by accident, it's kind of by design. It was created to not make sense and to ensure that not one person had total and absolute power. And now we're at this point where one person kind of has total and absolute power, and it's weird because that's not how it's supposed to be. And so I think your points about putting, letting young people sit at the table and really offer their opinion and consider it as something that's not necessarily a joke, but something that actually has real positive benefits associated with it. And so a big shift that the Democratic Party has incorporated in 2020 has been memes and allowing these cool meme pages to go up. Yang had probably a couple dozen meme pages up on Facebook in 2020 over the summer. And during the stimulus checks, all of the meme pages kind of were freaking out because it was essentially incorporating his ideas into policy. And so it's so cool seeing how information is now, it went from booklets, people were handing out pamphlets and whatnot, and now it's memes and TikTok videos are educating voters. And if that's the route that it's going to go, so be it. And I think embracing that and being ahead of it is really what's going to separate for the years to come, because I do think, as your point about being 39 and voting in your first midterm in 2018, I was looking at voter data last week from 1980 to 2008. And in midterm elections, people were showing up to vote over 34% less of the time. And that's horrible. You got to have people who are voting, and, your point about, what you wear to voting, and people don't really know what it is. It's this very, mystical duty that is given to citizens, and this concept of, my vote doesn't matter, I'm just one person, needs to totally be struck from, the public record, because it's it's not good. It's going to really set people up to think that they shouldn't be involved, and they should. I mean, this is their future just as much as they want to be involved in it. And so they need to take the steps. And I think opening up a seat to kids at the table is really going to help engage a much younger generation.
I want to comment as well. I watched a video. It was Barack Obama answering an intern's question, right before he left office. And, he says, well, my vote doesn't seem to matter. Why are we even voting? And Obama goes into this like 20-minute answer about how democracy doesn't work the way it's supposed to unless everyone votes. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing democracy, it's not working how it should be. And a lot of that is because of youth. And so we've got 10 minutes left. I have two pressing questions I want to ask the group, and we can just go right down the line. But first is, what are the biggest, issues that you've seen youth voters want to focus on? And the second is, if you could give any message to people watching, what would you say to encourage them to get out to vote on November 3rd or beforehand, which should actually be the preference? So let's start with Leo, and then we'll go down the line and we'll go from there.
I think ramping up social media and a big thing that candidates are known for is that direct relationship to the voters and getting to speak in front of these large rallies. And we don't have that anymore. And as we saw at the DNC, it was, Zoom conferences, going through, having different people speak. And I think maintaining a sense of interaction between the candidate and the voters is so important, and making it seem, or at least give a perception that, the candidate is accessible and is listening. Biden, he's older. He definitely doesn't represent exactly what the Democratic Party is going for in certain aspects with the progressive kind of factions that are within it. And so I think making him come off as being a little bit more hip and being a little bit more aware of what a younger generation wants is extremely important. I think the best means of doing that is through conversations where he's literally answering questions that people have and answering questions that young voters have in particular, because I think if he's able to connect with them and show that he does care about their opinion and does genuinely want to help enact some policies that will help with student loans or whatever for the younger generation, I think he'll be in a better shape. And also just staying on course and not succumbing to any of the memes and all of the stuff that comes out of the Republican Party. It's sticking to your message and, making sure you don't get complacent along the way, and just keep hammering until November 3rd and potentially until January. So,
Well, thanks. Elizabeth, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think the most important issues are for youth voters, and what's your message to people who are undecided and need to get out to vote?
So I think, and this is something that I've heard a lot from young folks, is a feeling of disassociation and not feeling represented. And I think that one of the most powerful messages that we can honestly send is that what we're doing right now is more than just what our dream candidate would be. It's more than just, breaking everything down, because a lot of times we need to be real about what the consequences are, and then also be real about the plans. The left has shifted the Democratic Party in so many ways. This is actually, if you look at the details of what's being proposed, it's stuff that would make Hillary Clinton blanch. This is so, we've been able to push a real radical agenda, all of us together, saying this is what we want and this is what we demand. And I think that standing up and saying we all need to win and we all need to come together is so, so important. And then also recognizing that you need to be the leader that you want to see. If you don't like what you're seeing, stand up and be that leader. we just came out with this video about Arizona. You can go to movement.vote and see it. And it talks about how some of the organizers, if you remember 10 years ago, this horrendous bill that basically let cops stop any person and demand to see their papers, that passed and just put the Latinx community in just pure terror. Cops actually stopped me living in Florida and said, a rule just passed, if we don't see your papers, we can arrest you. Like, this is the kind of huge echo that this had. And leaders right now from Lucha, from Poder, from some of the biggest Latinx organizing groups that are turning Arizona from a bright red state to a purple state to maybe a blue state, they got their start there. They've never done anything. They showed up for a protest for the first time ever and have now actually launched the organizations they wished had been there to get Arpaio, the horrible sheriff, out of office. The wins that they've been able to rack up by saying, you know what, I'm really young. This is the world I want. I'm going to stand up and be the leader I want to see. That's what we need. And really getting people to get inspired and getting involved by the power they hold and by their ability to change the world by leading.
I think that's really great advice, and I hope that whoever's listening in on this really takes that to heart. So thank you. Victor, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. So I like to think about it this way. Like, so we have a partnership with Alana Glazer from Broad City on a program called Cheat Sheet for the Voting Booth. And the premise of it is that, like, hey, you know what? She's not stoked about Joe Biden. I understand why people aren't, but she's down to vote for him because she realizes what's at stake. And the way that I think about and that's another example of just meeting people where they're at. Like, we understand there's a bit of an enthusiasm gap, right? Especially as it pertains to younger voters and further left voters. But at the end of the day, you know, if you care, if there's things that you care about, whether that's climate change, racial justice, college affordability, maintaining your health care, right? There's only one way that we stay in the game and keep the ball moving down the field, even at 1 inch at a time. And the thing is, like, if Donald Trump gets reelected, the game is over, right? And so voting for Biden and Harris keeps us in the game, and it maybe doesn't give us the Hail Mary winner that we all want with a Bernie or Elizabeth Warren, but it keeps us on the field and it gives us a first down. It gives us a chance to live another day, live to fight another day, right? And when it comes to politics and government, like, that's how it works. And so, you know, I just encourage people to really look at, like, what is it they value and what is it that's going to move us 1 inch closer to the goalpost.
And that's all on the ballot. It's right there. You just got to pick the right person and vote for them. So thank you. Katherine, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to echo, I mean, everyone's making such great points. You know, I think that Elizabeth made a great point that, like, technology is not this magic bullet that can just save, you know, organizing, but good organizing, like good technology, can support and amplify great organizing. And so it all starts with organizers and people getting involved and people, you know, doing their part on the elections. And for what BallotReady is doing to prepare for the elections, we are in the process of finalizing our collection of all over 150,000 candidates that are going to be on the ballot all across the nation, so that there's a reliable, nonpartisan place to go and research your candidates all the way down to the local level, including your water board commissioner or your city councilman, or your, you know, your mayoral candidate, to make sure that you're voting for people who align with your values all the way down without bad misinformation. So a lot of these great points that everyone's bringing up, and just making sure that we can provide that information, making sure that it's reliable, and getting it into the hands of the voters who need it the most.
And I would say that's one of the most daunting things about going into a voting booth. If you don't have a chance to look at all the candidates beforehand, you get in there and you're like, who am I supposed to vote for? I don't know what they stand for. There's not like a little checklist with bullet point notes about like their views on things. So printing all that out, having it ready when you go into the voting booth, I think it's just such a great resource. So yeah, thank you for compiling that and working on such an important tool for us.
Yeah, our founder often says that voting sometimes feels like a test that you were never told you had to study for. And it should feel that way. You should feel prepared to vote and feel like you have the tools and the information you need. And great organizations like the ones that you guys are all doing, working for to help amplify that as well.
Well, thank you so much. And lastly, Molly, I would love to hear from you, and we'll wrap up this fireside panel.
Yeah, just quickly, I mean, I would echo everything that folks have said. And, speaking directly to young people about getting involved in this election or voting, like, I think the thing I think about the most is just demanding better than what we've seen recently and in years past, and remembering that, like, actually elected officials work for us. It's not the other way around. And we have the power to vote them out if they're not doing a good job. It might not feel like they work for us right now because they're doing a lot of things wrong and aren't benefiting the American people, but we can have a say in that, and we get to like speak up on November 3rd and let folks know how we're feeling about it. But you don't get that say if you don't actually cast a ballot. So, take this chance to, right, exactly, get a first down, move some things forward, and then do not stop in November. Actually, like, speak up louder and make sure that we're holding the folks that we vote into office accountable for the things we care about, and then just keep moving forward after this.
I think that's great advice. The fight does not stop on November 3rd. It is going to be a continuous uphill battle, and I'm so grateful and appreciative for all of the work you guys are doing to spearhead that. So thank you for your time today. Thank you again for sharing your insights and perspectives with us. This was invaluable, and I feel like I've just consumed so much important information that I just want to shout out to the world. So thank you all. If you look at the bottom of this agenda, we have notes taken, and so feel free to look through all of those. If you want to recap, again, this fireside chat will be on our YouTube channel, so feel free to send that out to any friends. I'll send a recap email and include that link so that you all have it. Thank you guys for your time, and good luck.
Thank you, everyone. Good luck for all of us. We need a win for this horrible year.